Okay, so good afternoon. We're a few minutes early, so we'll just wait a second, let people log on. I'll open up so I can make sure I see comments. Okay, so good afternoon. This is Steve Mazzacane. I am Steve Mazzacane. This is the Steve Mazzacane podcast. We are, one thing I'll mention so we're looking for a better name than just my name. That's not really much fun. And so we want something that kind of, my goal here is to be kind of a voice of logic and reason as we approach things to avoid the political nonsense, but understanding that the political nonsense exists. So if you can think up of a name that is better for the podcast and would convey, a long conversation this weekend about using the word moderate, because the moderate often implies being in the middle, and being in the middle isn't always the best thing. Sometimes you have such crazy extremes that being in the middle of something can be left or right. It may not be actually moderate. So I'm trying to think of the right words to change the name of the podcast as we try to grow it beyond just Branford and beyond just the shoreline. So if you have ideas on a name that kind of conveys that, I'd appreciate any help we can get with the branding, and I will certainly give you credit if it's something that we choose. Richard, I do feel better. Thank you very much. I got a great night's sleep. Shannon, thank you as well. I hope you guys are doing well. And so thank you. Yes, I am. I slept well. Actually, to be honest with you, slept about 9:30 this morning, which helped. So I don't know why. Yesterday was just one of those things where it was really hot and dizzy and not good. So good afternoon and welcome to those that are watching. And I do want to thank you. A lot of new readers and emails have come in saying, I'm glad you exist. I'm glad there's a voice like this out there. I will talk about an email we got yesterday. So we have, listen, we're never going to please everybody. We live in a country right now where, not just country, but town, state, whatever, where there is real fervor on the left and the right. And that's not just politically, but also on almost every issue. There are people who are angry and upset and trying to be in the middle, trying to be logical, trying to take a reasonable approach to the issues doesn't always rub everybody the right way. And so we talked about parents' involvement with Shannon Sharkey, no longer holding that seat on the Board of Education when she resigned, and the need to be moderate and be reasonable, especially from parents who were, quite frankly, some were being a little overbearing at a time of serious crisis for these schools. And there's issues with Hamlet, there's issues with the administrators, but certainly there were some things that were too much. And Shannon did her best to get questions answered. Hamlet wasn't all that helpful, but the parents weren't either. And so in talking on those podcasts, we talked about multiple different areas, including parents, including administration, including teachers that had to work on things. And we were just filled with emails afterwards of gratitude, especially from teachers saying, thank you for putting a voice to this. But we're not always going to please everybody. And there is one or two parents on social media that was sent a few screenshots yesterday that said, some blogger is running his mouth and blaming parents and bullying parents. Nothing could be further from the truth. But, I'll give you an example of what happened last week as part of the Board of Education meeting. So there were, because it's not happening online and it's a tech world now, parents were able to call in. Many parents called in with legitimate, real questions, and they had the undivided attention of the entire Board of Education. They had the Hamlet Hernandez, the superintendent, and other administrators there to answer questions. And so you would think somebody who has said, we can't get our questions answered, no one's answering our questions, that person would take that time to ask those questions. Instead, there were a few parents that use that time to berate the board and say you're not communicating enough, never asked a question, and that said something like they have a list of 700 questions that were unanswered. So my response to that is, you're welcome to your opinion. You're welcome to not appreciate what I said on the podcast. I get it. There's no way I'm going to please everybody all the time. In fact, I'd rather have a discussion that initiates here that continues elsewhere. But if you had a list of 700 questions, you're not reasonable. Just say it. That's not quite, you're not part of the conversation if you're starting off with a list of 700 questions. And what happens is the person gets mad at Hamlet, or they get mad at the board, and they grab other parents and say, let's get all our questions together and just bombard them in the middle of COVID. It wasn't going to happen. And I have been critical of Hamlet. I've been critical of the Board of Education. But parents play a role too. And I will tell you, we have posted since, what would you like to see better? The comments were respectful and logical and intelligent and informed. We have 2,500 to 3,000 students, which means we have between 3,000 and 6,000 parents. The ones that are overly vocal might be 30. The vast majority are reasonable, logical, and understand this is COVID. This is unprecedented. Nobody has experience dealing with this. And the response I've even heard from that over the weekend in the last few days from parents is they feel the school's doing a good job. Everybody wants to send their kids back to school, but they feel the schools are doing the best job they can. So we can't please everybody. And by definition, by trying to be reasonable or logical, one of the reasons we do this live is you can raise those questions publicly. You can say it publicly. You can post a comment. We've had comments we had to delete. One yesterday was ridiculous. But if it's a logical question, I'll answer the best I can. If I don't have an answer for it, I'll put it off. But that's why we do it live, so we can have those conversations. So feel free to post your questions or comments. Great job. Mr. Carroll, they addressed my question and acknowledged mine. Now, fingers crossed, we wait. Yeah, they did. Administrators want to answer your questions. But if you're showing up with a list of 700 questions and yelling about them, you're really trying to get an answer? Or are you trying to start a war? And if you're trying to start a war, there's no point in having that conversation. We have to, one of the things we have to be, if we're going to be reasonable and be logical and informed voters and citizens, is we have to realize that when people are on the extremes, they're often unreasonable. We have to avoid them as part of the conversation. That may be your friends and neighbors, but they're not part of intelligent discussion. I got a text today from the Democratic Party, and I'm a registered Democrat. I tend to vote Democrat. I very likely will be a Biden voter. I've already publicly said I'm voting for Robin Comey because her opponent is not necessarily qualified for the seat. But the text was very simple today. And it said, hi, Stephen, it's Alex from Congressman Rosa DeLaura's office. Everyone in Connecticut can vote by absentee ballots. Do you plan to vote by absentee? No. We are glad you are voting in person. Can we count on your vote for the entire Democratic team? No. Of course you can't. Why would a reasonable person give up their right to take in information? I don't know what's going to happen between now and then. I'm never going to say I'm only voting for Democrats and I'm only supporting the Democratic team or I'm only voting for Republicans. That's crazy. That's absurd. If you get to a local level and you have a town doing as well as Brantford, am I going to vote for a Democrat despite Jamie Cosgrove doing the job he's doing? Of course not. That's stupid. Now, if somebody comes up and they're much better, we'll analyze that. It hasn't happened so far. If Obama runs again as a Democrat, I'm probably voting for a Democrat. No? So there's this idea that we can take an extreme position or lock ourselves into anything is crazy. On the Indian Neck page, somebody posted that their signs were stolen. Looks like they were Trump signs. And one of the commenters were, I'm glad the Trump signs are out because then I know which people not to spend time with. What? Like, you just had Ginsburg and Scalia stories on every channel known to man over the weekend. They vacationed together. They could not be further apart ideologically than you could imagine. I mean, they were nowhere close on many, many, many decisions. But they vacationed together. Their families were together. They ate together. They were best friends. And now we have comments saying, I'm glad I know you're a Trump fan, so I won't spend time with you. By the way, you're still on social media talking to Trump fans. So you're basically full of shit. But that sentiment has to go. That sentiment's the problem. And so if we have any goal here with this podcast, and I'm not saying I'm the savior of the world by any means, but if it could be one podcast in the right direction, if somebody wants to start another one and maybe they spread and it's let's be reasonable, let's be logical, and let's take the facts in and then make decisions. I hope it's a positive thing, and I hope that happens. I don't know for sure that it will. That said, if you have an idea for a title for our podcast that conveys those things, I would love to hear it from you. All right, I want to talk for a minute about TikTok. You know, we talked so much about the Supreme Court, and we talked so much about social issues, that TikTok is actually one that I think will have a bigger impact on your life in the next 4 to 6 years. And to those who don't know what TikTok, I will tell you I've never used TikTok. It is an app on your phone. It is, sorry if I missed any comments here. It's an app on your phone. It does these little cartoonish videos. You know, when Trump got in office, one of the first things he did was went after China. And one of the reasons he went after China was because of intellectual property theft. Rules in China allow the government, the communist government, to access data from its companies on demand. So if they go to Alibaba or they go to Tencent or they go to a major Chinese company and say, I want your digital information about people who use the app, the age of people, how long they're on the app, all this key demographic information. They can do that. The government can demand that. Here, the government cannot demand that here. So the concern is when you have these apps that are controlled by Chinese companies and therefore are subject to Chinese law, the government at any time can walk in and say, I want that information. And that was the concern. Do we want this app, which is growing in popularity, is everywhere, kids are using it like crazy, it's growing to adults as well. Do we want China to be able to say, I want to get that data? And data is a huge business. A lot of companies that provide free apps, they're making money by taking data from people and selling it. You know, Facebook sells ads based on data. They know the buying habits of people that live on this street versus another street, this town versus another town. Elections, the Trump campaign, the Biden campaign are spending a fortune on data. And they go to places like Facebook or Instagram or any Apple, whoever has information on buying patterns and the age and demographics of people. Data is a huge industry. So Trump went to war early on against China on using on the stealing of intellectual property theft and that data early on in his campaign. And now he's going against TikTok, and he basically has passed some executive orders that would make it impossible for American companies to work with TikTok unless they sold their American operations. The issue here is both Trump and Biden have taken a somewhat strong stance on China. You never hear Biden talk negatively about Trump's China war because there is merit to that. Trump had what's called a 2025, China had what's called a 2025 plan, which is basically a plan to take over world trade by 2025. And to do that, they funded many of their industries to kill foreign industries. They would fund their steel industry. The government would pay for them so they can undercut American steel on the market. That happens in a lot of different industries. So that war is going to drastically impact what happens after the election. We talk about Supreme Court nominations and decisions and abortion rights and all of those things, and we'll talk about all those things over the next course of the week. But that China war will be the biggest aspect because it impacts everybody. The Apple manufactures phones in those countries. They sell to those countries. Every Microsoft, every major company, car companies sell and interact worldwide. What's happening with TikTok can set a standard for how foreign countries work with tech companies that are worldwide tech companies. And that can drastically impact the apps you have. It could drastically impact the value of the companies you have stock in, that your 401k is in, that your pension is in. It could significantly impact international trade on many, many, many different areas, but no one's really paying attention to that. It's kind of an afterthought right now with everything going on. We'll update you as we get more information on that, but what you're seeing happen right now, which isn't getting all the headlines, is going to have a much bigger impact on your life, likely, than the Supreme Court in the next couple of years. There's no question about it. So it's important that we at least understand what's taking place there. All right. What else is on this list? Give me 1 second here. All right, RGB. I spent some time today reading the Shelby County decision. And if you've never read a Supreme Court decision, I think this is one you should read. And we mentioned this a little bit yesterday, because the articles that write about Supreme Court decisions write about it in terms of right or wrong. They made this decision because of X. They made this decision because of Y. And our own ideology, our own ideology will dictate if we agree or not. When the Voting Rights Act was passed 40, 50 years ago, there were certain aspects put in that certain counties could not change their voting rules unless they got approval from the federal government, because they were notorious for doing nasty things, right? They would do things to make it difficult. They would do like IQ test kind of things, merit tests, to make sure certain people couldn't pass, knowing African Americans were going to have a hard time passing those things and taking away their right to vote. So part of that law was that if those counties, if those towns, if those states wanted to change any of their law, they had to get approval from the federal government first, or from Congress first. So this set up a different playing field, right? Most of the country had X, they could change their laws, but just had to abide by the federal guidelines. But these particular counties, these particular areas, couldn't do it. So 40 years after the fact, one of them files a lawsuit saying it's been too long. We don't want to be held to this standard based on what was happening 40 years earlier. There's some merit to that argument. You know, how long does somebody stay punished? And the Supreme Court agreed with that argument. Now, Ruth Ginsburg was the opposite, and that's where this whole dissent that you see, everybody's picture says dissent, Ruth Ginsburg, it started with this case, because her argument was basically, why would you change something that's working? If you have these counties that were doing and acting in a poor manner, that were deliberately taking steps 40 years ago to stop Black voters. I think she likened it in her decision to, you know, throwing the umbrella away because while it was raining, you were still dry. And she's right. You know, so if something's working, why would you change this? Now, she was on the dissenting side, and that's where that's really where her reputation as the dissenter came up. And that case is amazing because you can understand both sides of it. And we can learn so much by reading Supreme Court decisions. You have some of the smartest people on the planet, conservative or liberal, doesn't matter, writing about major issues. I'm telling you, as you read the conservative one, you're like, wow, that makes sense. And as you read the liberal one, you're like, wow, that makes sense too. And if you're a parent trying to teach your child the value of the Supreme Court, if you're trying to teach them what RGB did, RBG, I'm sorry, the impact and the intelligence of these people and how to think for yourself and how to really look at both sides of an equation, or 3 or 4 sides of an equation, take any controversial Supreme Court decision, go online, Google the majority opinion and the dissent, and read them. It will be the most eye-opening experience from a legal standpoint, but also from a logical and reasonable standpoint. Sometimes they go at each other. They're funny. They can be interesting. Scalia was phenomenal. I didn't always agree with what he said, but it was always made you stop and think. And if I know there's rallies and there's candlelight vigils for her, but if you want to honor her memory, read some of her decisions. Not the shortened version in some article online. Go online, look for her dissents, look for her majority opinions, and read those. Then go to those same cases and read the opposite view. That's how you honor someone of her intelligence. You can hold all the candles you want, that's great. It's not going to change anything. But if you read her decisions, it will. It'll change the way you think. And if you see the respect she had for Scalia, that they were so close, they could spend all that time together despite being completely different when it came to ideology. It tells us everything about who we should be. So those who truly want to honor her, hold your candles. That's great. Go read those decisions. Read those decisions to your kids. Have them explain it back to you. Then go read this decision in the same case of the opposing view. Your eyes will be opened. It's spectacular. And you're getting a view of what logical, reasonable, and unbelievably intelligent people think about when they see these issues, what the law really means. And I've always, we talk about rallies and we talk about going in front of the Supreme Court. We talk about, having huge marches on Congress. Reading from smart people that disagree with us is spectacular. Why do you think she didn't retire as she was fighting cancer when Obama was president? I don't know a reason why somebody doesn't retire. They have one of the questions that came in. I don't know why she didn't retire, but I know that if I was a Supreme Court justice, I'd never retire. I love this. I love these discussions and debates. I'm a junkie for those type of conversations. But I think she was a warrior on the court. And the truth is, I can't say that I agree much with Clarence Thomas, but some of his decisions are interesting. I'm still fascinated reading them. Roberts, I'm always fascinated to read, but he's the one most likely to switch sides. If you have a 6-3 court, there's some dangerous stuff that can happen here. And the biggest concern, obviously, is that Obamacare gets struck down completely. If there's any one single reason, like there's some things about Trump I'll agree with. The China war, I agree with. But if there's any one single reason I cannot vote for Trump, it's healthcare. Trump ran for 2 years. We're going to have a better replacement for Obamacare. We're going to get rid of it, and we're going to have something better. It is now 3 years and 10 months later, 10 and a half months later, we have not the slightest hint of any replacement. He could have taken Obamacare, changed 2 words, called it Trump Care, and put it. At least you put something forward. So now we have, very likely, this person's going to be put in legally. Dems won't like it, but it'll happen. You're going to have a 6-3 conservative lead on the court. The chances are higher, not guaranteed, but higher, that Obamacare will be repealed in some way. And Trump and I'll say 6 years because he started this 2 years before. In 6 years of being a national voice, 4 years of being the president of the United States, promised to have a replacement, didn't do a thing. He didn't say, I'll work on it. He didn't say, I'll try. He ran on a replacement. And Obamacare is not perfect. I'm open to seeing what that replacement is. He didn't do it. Didn't even put something forward. If he had put something forward and said, man, they're fighting us every way. We can't get anything through. We can't get it talked about. The Dems are fighting it. Okay, we can have that conversation. But nothing. And as a Republican, how do you defend that? I have maintained many times on this podcast, I think the single greatest thing you can do for the economy is single-payer health care. Now, if people are questioning why I'm a Democrat, or that I'm a Democrat in this regard especially. The idea that now you can take a job and not have to worry about health care. The idea that you can leave a job and try for something else without having to worry about health care. The idea that you can start a new business without having to worry about health care will be monumental in a capitalist society. So many more chances. There are so many people who have refused to leave a job they didn't like, or they were underpaid, or for whatever reason, because they didn't want to risk not having health care. I know 1 million small business owners that were able to start their business because their spouse has health care. So someone who has union health care or government health care, because their spouse has it, has been able and had the freedom to start a business and take a risk and take advantage of our capitalists and be entrepreneurial. But because there are millions of people who are stuck in jobs they don't want to be at because they don't want to lose health care. So the president focused on the economy. I mean, how could that not help the economy? If we have people, we take healthcare off the table, so those aren't one of your benefits anymore. Everybody gets the same healthcare. And by the way, the unions would get the same healthcare too. They don't get any special treatment here. Everybody gets the same healthcare. So somebody's working for a company for $60,000 a year and suddenly says, all right, I want to try something else. I want to do something else. They go on the market. Other employers who are after that person don't have to worry about healthcare costs. What happens? The offers of employment go up. People make more money. Now, they're going to have higher taxes to pay for that healthcare, but they're going to make more money. And they're going to be willing to take a risk, start a business, take a leap, leave a job, start a new job. And when we have competition for more people, incomes go up. This is math. Instead, we have the economic president, the guy running on the economy, saying, I know there are millions of people who have gotten health care now because of Obamacare. I want to get rid of Obamacare. I promise you a replacement for Obamacare, and has never done it. And now, with Ginsburg's death, the chances of Obamacare being gone, which is far from perfect, but it's something, are much, much higher. If you're a Republican, how do you make that jive? If you're a Trump supporter, and he said that, how do you make that jive? Congratulations if you have health care. But I'm single, and I'm self-employed. My health care is about $6,000, just over $6,000 a year, with a $6,000 deductible. So if I get sick, I've got to come up with $12,000. Now, I'm self-employed. I find a way to do it. If I worked for somebody and I had health insurance, I would have to hesitate to leave because I don't want to lose that extra $12,000 a year that I'm getting through my employer. It would be a massive boon to have a national healthcare company, a national healthcare plan. He gave us nothing. Nothing. You don't like Obamacare, but at least he came up with something. So those are the questions you have to ask about Trump. He says and says and says, and some things, the China war, I'm with him on. I don't know what the overall plan is, but I get the problem. Obama should have started that. I think Biden will continue that. If you're not seeing Democrats complain in an area about Trump, it's because they're with him. Because they understand the China war makes sense. But he's done nothing for 5 years now. Proposal that was good, he probably couldn't have gotten it. Going forward, TikTok's huge. People don't realize it. They're not paying a lot of attention to it, but TikTok is huge. After the election, it will be even bigger. It will impact how we view and how we're impacted by foreign nations in international trade for years and years to come. Second one is what happens to Obamacare and why has there not been some sense of a replacement proposed by Trump in 6 years or by the Republicans in 6 years? We don't have an answer to that question. And if there's any one reason I can't get behind Trump, you can't promise me, you can't fight to remove the one program, Obamacare, promise a replacement, and go 6 years and never give us one. Even one to debate, even a bad one. We got nothing. All right, we'll be back tomorrow. A few emails came in. I'll read them in a second during this podcast. You can always comment directly, but if you want to email me, you can. But if anything else, we're seeing more and more of posts on RBG's passing and hatred for the right and hatred for the left. It's the opposite of what she would want. It's the opposite of the way she lived. What we should be doing is sitting down with people who think and act and feel differently than we do. Logical people, take the extremes out. Do what RBG did. Go to dinner with them. Go on vacation with them. Talk about issues. As friends, make fun of each other. Who gives a damn? But that's what it's supposed to be. And if anybody wants to have dinner and let me rip apart your political beliefs, I'm sure those conversations, a fly on the wall between those two must have been spectacular. Must have been amazing. And it's unfortunate that we don't get a chance to see that anymore. All right, we'll see you tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Thanks again for joining me. Yes, thank you for all the emails. I feel better. And I should be back on tomorrow at 4. If there are questions or comments or complaints, feel free to send those in. I'd be glad to read them and address them when we're live tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Have a great night, guys.